This week, it looked like we were going to war with Iran all over again. And I talked about this in great detail on Tuesday. And I brought everybody up to speed. You can begin the story around December 29th, I think it was, when Netanyahu came to Mar-a-Lago for his fifth visit with Trump in 2025, fifth and final visit for the year. And Netanyahu came to the United States again. Why? Because he wants us to bomb Iran again. He wants us to support them in bombing Hezbollah again. He wants the United States to give him the green light to go back to war in Gaza. He wants permission to escalate the war in the Middle East on every single front. And Trump didn't commit to a timeline or necessarily any of these particular options, but he did say if Iran rebuilds their nukes, if they rebuild their missiles, you can bomb them. Sure enough, a week later, we get these giant protests in Iran, armed by the CIA and Mossad.
By the way, in addition to that, Nick is right about that, but he also, over kind of the New Year period, I think it was December 28 and 29, stood with Netanyahu at the White House and said, if they kill protesters, that we will launch additional strikes too. And then you have, these supposedly organic protests rising up in Iran, to the maximum degree of U.S. and CIA propaganda to spark a war, saying, hey, that's the impetus for war, when they just keep moving the goalpost. As Nick said, it was the nuclear weapons program, which Tulsi Gabbard denied the existence of prior to the U.S. strikes against Iran last summer. Then if they rebuild ballistic missiles that all countries have, we'll do it, or kill protesters. Well, what'd you get? You got protests.
Backed by the CIA and Mossad, embellished in the media, assisted by Elon Musk's Starlink. And it looks like the Iranian government might be on the ropes. That's not really true, but they created this perception. And so this week, it looks like we're staring down the barrel of another war with Iran. And Trump has now redirected one of our carrier strike groups to the Middle East, presumably to escalate against Iran. And it seemed just a couple of days ago that we were on the precipice of dropping bombs on them. There were reports that there was major Israeli Air Force activity over Syria, fighter jets over Iraq. U.S. bases were being evacuated. It seems that a second strike on Iran was called off at literally the last minute earlier this week. And a lot of people say, and I said this on Twitter tonight, a lot of people say, well, what a relief we didn't bomb Iran again. Phew, that was close. We almost went to war with Iran, but Trump saved us because he's the president of peace, because he's the president of no new wars.
Yeah, president of no new wars in a golden age, right? When we did launch a war against Iran, first saying, hey, the government going, this is just Israel doing it. Then, I guess we're going to join it, and, let's evacuate Tehran. Trump sent out that evacuation order, and then said if Iran doesn't want to make itself great again, maybe regime change is the right idea. He true socialed that, hangs out with Lindsey Graham this entire last week with the Make Iran Great Again hat, of course, siding with Lindsey Graham and the Neocons on this. And we're just supposed to believe that there's nothing wrong with this either, that the U.S. gets re-involved there, does have CIA involvement.
People are saying, so this is a good thing. I guess we're not going back to war. But then you wake up today and you read in the press, this is in the Wall Street Journal, this is in the Times of Israel, this is everywhere. The reason that Trump did not follow through on the strike in Iran this week is because when the military told him about our options to strike in Iran, they could not guarantee that it would topple the Iranian government. So what does that imply? It implies that Trump fully intended earlier this week to pursue regime change in Iran. That's what that tells us. If he called off the strike at the last minute because the military told them, wait a second, this is not going to bring down the Iranian regime, and Trump said, oh, okay, never mind. What does that tell you? Their goal, which they are now admitting, is to topple the Iranian government with U.S. military force.
Exactly right, and it's been the long-term goal of the Likudniks, of the Neocons, that wanted this as part of the clean break, that Iran was going to be the coup de grace, the last domino to fall, the seventh country in the list of 7 countries in that memo that Wesley Clark saw in the weeks after 9/11. They don't even make a secret about it. All the propaganda is directed that way. We know that AIPAC, the Israel lobby, and Miriam Adelson wants this, so let it be done. But it does take moving U.S. military assets into the region too, which seems to be happening right now while everyone else is off to something else. Talking about, things related to Venezuela or inflation, and those topics are really important, right?
So what happened last year to, well, this is only about the nuclear program, remember? Last June, they said, we don't want regime change. We don't want a war with Iran. We don't want offensive activity. We don't want to get involved. They said, we just want to disable their nuclear centrifuges. So we're going to drop some bombs, and then that's it, and then we're going to leave. Remember? And everybody said that was genius. Everybody celebrated. But of course, it's never that simple, ever. Not in Iraq, not in Syria, not here. Netanyahu comes back begging for a war. Trump apparently was moments away, and maybe this is obviously all planted by the administration. They are creating a perception, and we could talk about what the agenda is there. But I think it is fair to say their agenda here is to push over this government, to topple this government with potentially multiple waves of airstrikes against government facilities, against their internal security service, against their missile launch platforms. Who knows? Who knows how much and what are the targets? We know, however, that the end game is to push over the Iranian government. So what they said last year was a lie. It wasn't about the nukes. It wasn't limited. And now we are pursuing a top-down regime change with U.S. military force because Netanyahu wants it.
I'm actually kind of happy about the propaganda coming out of Washington, I'll say that for once, because they promoted this as a severe setback for the Iranians. Their nuclear weapons program is set back decades, so we don't have to worry about regime change. But they still get around that for the sake of the Israel lobby by just shifting the goalpost to other absurd narratives that are supposedly casus belli for renewing strikes against Iran, rebuilding ballistic missiles that every other country has. That's going to be the impetus for war, he said at the White House with Netanyahu. If they kill protesters, that's going to be the impetus. Doesn't matter the threat or lack thereof, and yeah, it's the lack thereof to the United States, we're still going to strike. So they just keep moving the war propaganda to meet the current scenario.
Now, they called off the strike this week. What are they doing in the meantime? They're moving a carrier strike group into the region. You know what that is? That's an aircraft carrier with a mini air force and a small army backed up with a number of other naval vessels. And the reason they're bringing this force package to the Middle East, bring the aircraft, bring the personnel, bring the radar. What they are preparing for is the ability to launch multiple waves of strikes if necessary, to anticipate, detect, and counter an Iranian counterattack. That is why they're deploying a carrier strike group. So they saw this week, hey, wait a second. The Iranian government crushed the protests. So I don't know how much military action is really going to help the protesters if that's over. So 1, we missed the window. 2, all our ships are in the Caribbean right now, intervening in Venezuela, so we don't have enough manpower, we don't have enough force, if it's necessary, to control the escalation ladder in Iran. What's the solution? Bring more force. And presumably conduct more subterfuge and subversion inside Iran to lay the groundwork for another wave of protests. What did Trump do on Monday? 25% secondary sanctions, which he's calling a tariff, on any country that does business with Iran. So the protest started because the currency collapsed and one of their major state-sponsored banks collapsed. That's what precipitated it. Presumably then a bunch of armed breakaway groups, Kurds, Baloch types, liberals, other assorted groups took to the streets, organized on social media, beamed down from Starlink. So they're going to hurt the economy further, organize the resistance more, maybe push more weapons in, arm the Kurds from Iraq, send them over the border to effectively invade Iran while they wait for the carrier strike group to get in position. And what's amazing is that this is just now like a foregone conclusion that we're going to war in Iran. How insane is that? Trump gets elected, it's not even on anybody's radar. Nobody was thinking in 2024, we're going to war with Iran. If you're paying attention, you knew that's where it was headed. But that's not what he campaigned on. He was in Michigan pandering to the Muslim population there, saying, I'll end the war in the Middle East.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, the dissidents, the anti-war dissidents, those who have opposed the neocons for decades knew that this was in the cards, that they wanted the Iranian regime to fall, and it didn't help our trepidations thinking about that prospect, knowing how closely Trump was tied to the Israel lobby, is tied to AIPAC and Miriam Adelson, but at the same time, of course, Trump's campaign rhetoric always violated his sheer ambitions and the ambitions of the deep state and those he surrounded himself with, like Pompeo, like John Bolton, like Marco Rubio, like Mike Waltz, like Mike Huckabee, who have always wanted these military misadventures that never pay off for us, and are only for the benefit of genocidal regimes in the Middle East, particularly Israel. That's why it's happening.
In June of 2025, there was great trepidation about getting involved in Iran until it happened and it was quick and it was over. Now it's 2026, second year. Oh, this is just what we have now. This is just what it is. We're at war with Iran. We're actively pursuing regime change. We're going to intervene. And the U.S. media fully on board. Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times. You read any of these papers any day over the past 2 weeks, and it is nonstop, wall-to-wall atrocity propaganda about the protests in Iran. Sob stories, and this one got murdered, and this one got crushed, and these are the bloodiest protests, and maybe 1 million people died. And you could see it is affecting public opinion. The public is saying, oh, well, if there is a democratic uprising in Iran, we should help them out.
Exactly, and hey, if it was 20,000, which it wasn't, 20,000 protesters killed, that's what Barry Weiss's CBS News reported. That's impetus to go to a regime change war, but they'll just make excuses, any excuse under the sun, for the Palestinians dying 5 times that rate at the hands of the IDF and the Israelis in Gaza. Oh, those are just isolated figures, we can't believe them, they're all Hamas's fault, Israel's just defending itself. You know, Hamas deserves this. We can keep the Palestinians in subjugation forever because of it. They make any excuse under the sun for those deaths, but for the 20,000 supposedly, which it's not, it's definitely not that high. That's enough to justify the toppling of a regime. I'm sorry. That is hypocritical, it's absurd, and it's completely in line with Zionist lies.
It's insane. And it's insane how much people are drinking the Kool-Aid. People that you never would have thought 2 years ago would be supporting U.S. intervention to bring about regime change in Iran are now saying, you know what? If the protesters are out there, let's give them a hand. Let's bring it in. Why do we want to take the side of the Ayatollah and the mullahs and these Islamists? Well, if we could have a Persian monarchy, maybe that's a good thing. It's like, do you hear yourself? What do you think we've been doing for the past 25 years? If only it were ever that simple. Yeah, let's topple Bashar al-Assad. All these towelheads have Facebook. Let's just topple Assad and Gaddafi and Mubarak and everybody while we're at it. What could possibly go wrong? I don't know. How about 10 million Muslim refugees in Europe? How about a bunch of failed states cooking up terrorism? Where do you want to start? And people say, Persian monarchy sounds great. The people are already out there. Yeah, let's just drop some bombs. There could not possibly be any unintended consequences here. Golden age, golden age. King Darius II, save Israel, the king of Israel. It's getting freaky, man. I don't like it. So anyway, I just had to say something, a little something about that tonight. I know it's already in the rearview mirror. You know, like 3 days ago, everybody's ready to go to war with Iran. Trump says, never mind. I guess Iran shut it down. Everybody's on to the next thing. Totally insane. And mark my words, I said it on Tuesday, we are going back there this year. This is not over, okay? Trump did not pull us back from the brink. It's the opposite. He's deploying more soldiers to the brink so that we can go over the brink into a war. That much is clear. They are preparing the ground force that will do this. They're coordinating, I imagine, inside the country with who is going to take over. Those are some of the concerns. You know, the people that called off the strike, this time it wasn't Tucker and the populists. You know who called off the strike? It was Turkey, the Saudis, Qatar, and Israel. It was these countries that lobbied Washington and said, you can't use our airspace. We don't think it's a good idea. There's not a lot of regional support because they'd said we're just not ready for it yet. But allow us to get ready.
And that's part of it is completely ignored by the media, that they are moving these assets into the region for a strike, that the Israel lobby still wants it. It's not a matter of that, we suddenly don't want the regime change. They've always wanted the regime change. Benjamin Netanyahu has made a political career of not only preventing the establishment of a Palestinian state through funding Hamas, by the way, but also trying to topple the Iranian regime. It's not that they've changed their mind on it. They just want more setup time. And that's what they're getting right now.